Good afternoon. My name is Michael as well. The organizers decided to only invite Michaels to speak this afternoon. I represent the European University Association. I'll briefly mention who we are and what we do, but the main point of my talk today is to introduce to you what we see as the policy field we're operating in regarding lifelong learning and social inclusion, and the access agenda is very much part of this policy field. We'll talk about the university's Charter on Lifelong Learning, which is 2 years old, and I'll talk about a concrete project we're actually doing to implement and to see how this charter is being dealt with in reality. Just very briefly, we're a membership organization of 850 universities in 46 countries. So given that we have the Tempus colleagues here today as well, most of you are actually from a member country also EOA is dealing with. And we deal with policy, we deal with projects, we represent national university associations, and we try to be the strong voice for European universities in Europe and in the world. But that's not why I'm here to talk to you. The reason I'm here to talk to you is to talk about how we view the world, basically. And I'd like to start with a very concrete point, and that is to provide you a short overview of the past decade of reforms. And given that you're higher education experts, you, out of all people, should know what tremendous reform agenda Europe has been going through in the last decade. Now, Andy had stolen all the good slides, so I had to find something that would at least come to pass with what Andy has shown, just to illustrate you that it's all good and well to have aims and ambitions and to set goals. And if you have set these goals, then you could compare it to jumping through the hoops, but then if you look at the bottom of the slide, making this change is the important part. And that's usually forgotten by policymakers, that you actually not just need to jump through the hoops, but you also need to be able to make the change. And the higher education experts is at least a forum where we try to encourage the implementation of reforms and to achieve the change that is necessary. So I hope that you're not currently on the balance as this little guy going towards the sharks, but you never know. It's fair to say that the past 10 years have been quite eventful in Europe, in the sense that we have been working towards establishing a European higher education area through the Bologna process. There have been the Lisbon agenda of the European Union on making Europe the most competitive and knowledge-based economy and society in the world. We now have the EU 2020 ambitions. So there's a lot of policy attention going to the role of higher education. And the consequences have been very tremendous, I would say. If you look at what has changed in the last 10 years, the whole bachelor-master system, the credit points, the qualification framework discussions we're having, the quality discussions. I mean, there is quite an elaborate framework for quality assurance in Europe at the moment, which didn't exist 10 years ago. And it's really quite remarkable. But obviously, this is not the only thing that has changed in Europe. Actually, without us noticing it, our context has been shifting. And not enough attention is focused on this type of issues. If you look at the number of students that are enrolled in higher education in Europe, it has increased significantly in the last decade. The number have gone up through new institutions, new universities, larger traditional age cohorts coming into universities, double age cohorts coming into some countries, like Germany at the moment. The number of private institutions has increased in some countries deliberately, in other countries it's a byproduct. the way institutions operate is changing. You have the merger discussions in many places. You have new types of institutions developing. So the whole system is in flux, so to say, and we're somehow trying to make sense of it. And then on top of this, and probably the UK colleagues or the Irish colleagues will know what I'm talking about, but I also know about Bulgaria and Latvia and many other countries where the impact of the financial crisis and cuts in the budgets and public expenditure and the consequences that this will have on publicly funded higher education is at this point in time not really possible to estimate. But my best guess would be that we're in for another decade of change, and this could be even more transformative change than the Bologna process has initiated. Europe's universities are maybe in a bit of a uncomfortable position if you compare it to maybe other sectors in society, but probably exposed to the same push and pull factors as universities in other parts of the world. And to some extent, sometimes it's not always realized how contradictory the demands to universities are. You can have, for instance, the discussion on increasing and widening participation, which is a very valid point, and I think that universities should be really concerned about it. But these are not the only demands that universities have to answer to. At the same time, universities are being asked to be more locally integrated, regionally active, globally competitive, Europeanly networked, everything at the same time. You have to be more competitive, you have to be at the same time social inclusive, and to cater for a greater diversity of needs, of learners. You're supposed to concentrate on research anyhow. That's what you do as a university, and that's important. At the same time, this research needs to be applied as well, so that you can use it in your region to be a regional employer and knowledge growth motor and engine. You have to improve your academic quality, but at the same time look at the labor market and what the labor market demands. You have to be curricula that are compatible and comparable all over Europe, and they need to seamlessly fit each other, but at the same time they have to be culturally diverse and special, and everybody has to have its own identity reflected in them as well. And then finally, there's the push that universities want to be more autonomous, and governments also want to give more autonomy to universities, but at the same time there are different frameworks emerging to which you have to be complying. So it's not a perfect picture that you see here, and it's not a complete picture, but it's trying to illustrate at least the point that if you're a university, and I'm sure that all of you know this, that you're pushed and pulled in all sorts of directions at the same time, and you don't really know one, it's a good idea to focus on what Michael has just been describing on the socially inclusive, and one, you should be talking to your research minister about what you're going to do on research performance. So, secondly, as a context provision, I think you can arguably make a case that there's a need for flexible provision of education. I hate the term flexible learning from an education provider perspective, because we can't force people to be flexible learners, but we can provide flexible education so that you can actually learn flexibly. So one of the reasons I would say, and maybe Dominic in his next presentation will illustrate this with a nice graph, I'm not doing it, but de facto part-time students exist in many systems. They might not be having a legal status, but they are there. They are not all students are full-time. Not all students can study full-time because the funding system for student funding is inadequate, and thus the system as such produces part-time students because they have to work besides their studying. But this also means that students are in different needs. It's a completely different situation if your parents are paying for everything and you can concentrate 100% of your time on being an academic, or whether you have to work 20 hours a week and thus have to see how you balance that with studying and going to lectures. I also think that the political ambitions that policymakers make are only achievable if thought is given to making things more flexible. and taking into account the study-work relationship. And this has consequences if you follow this through on the whole education system, because in the very end, universities are at the top of the pyramid to some extent, and we have to deal with everything that has gone wrong during the previous education processes and fix all the bugs that are in the system, which is something that, in my opinion, universities need to be doing. But they can't fix everything, so a reflection on how higher education interrelates with other education sectors is almost as important as making higher education more socially inclusive. And then finally, maybe, and referring to the question this morning asked by, I think, the colleague from Israel, should all institutions be doing this? Should there be differentiation between universities, polytechnics, private institutions, and so on? I think there's a strong case to be made, what Lena said, that all should be active in this, but all should be active according to their own mission and role they have and they want to do. So not all of institutions should be doing the same things, but they should be doing different things to different groups, to students that are in different periods in their lives, and so on. But I'll go into detail on this at the next point, which is about the European Universities Charter on Lifelong Learning. Now, this document that some of you maybe have come across already, and I hope that not too many have, because otherwise I'll be boring your mind out at this point. But there's a document the European universities adopted 2 years ago, and which was developed on behalf of the French presidency, or on request of the French Prime Minister at the time, to explore the role of universities in lifelong learning. We started from the assumption that universities are already active players in lifelong learning. They might not be aware of this. There might be pockets of activities in each university, but at the same time, we also noticed that there's great confusion on when we talk about universities and lifelong learning and what their role is. So this charter is really trying to set a framework for the discussion on the role of universities in lifelong learning. And what it contains is a 10-point agenda for universities, commitments, and a 10-point agenda for governments to see what they can do to facilitate the role of universities in lifelong learning. Turning to the European universities. As you can see, 10 points. I'm not going to read them out. I hope you can read them. I'll just focus on 2 of them, especially because they're relevant here. First of them, widening access and the social dimension discussions, has somehow been merged into our lifelong learning framework. It's difficult to talk about social dimension, I think. It's a difficult concept. It's often being confused. It's probably not easier than lifelong learning. So I don't know whether we achieved much by putting this in, but at least by pointing out that widening participation has a connection to lifelong learning, you can actually make some progress in this field as well. And secondly, I think this charter tries to make the point that under the Bologna process, we've introduced a whole range of tools, mechanisms, principles, ideas, frameworks, you name it. And they all have potential to be useful for making lifelong learning a reality, for making learning more flexible and to provide flexible learning